show and update everyone on and some new discussions. So let me put a link in the chat here. I'll give you a sec. So this is the same link that I shared yesterday, but sorry, not yesterday, but last meeting, I believe. And it has been updated with some more of the stuff that we've been testing. So what I've been testing is the different data types on the EOS network, and I've tested mainly two different types of data that I plan on presenting to users, which is like URL and IPFS based. And so this goes back to the Novusphere design of it really doesn't matter on what layer your data is stored, so long as you can put a reference to that layer on the blockchain that we use for Novusphere. So in this case, we're doing some testing using EOS. We can basically serve that data back to the user. So to give you an example of what I mean, so in the very first test that I did, this was just an iframe to a YouTube video. So this is typically actually how a lot of streaming services tend to serve their video mirrors, is they tend to just keep a list of different websites that they use as an iframe. Another example is actually the background that we use on Novusphere.io, which is just this time lapse here. So this actually links to an MP4 file that's hosted on the Novusphere CDN. So again, this is a URL, so that's served just, how traditional web works. And then lastly, the third video example to refer to is this one here. So this is one you've seen very commonly in this project, which is the Intel movie, which isn't copyright, so it's fine for us to use. And so this one's actually on IPFS. So already this platform that's slowly starting to come together supports a few different types of data. So again, still using the EOS test page requires using scatter, but as you can see now, it's also making use of Novusphere DB. And that can, if you decide that you actually want to like test all of this yourself and run it locally on your computer, you can configure this. I'll actually point exactly to the line. Give me 1 second. So this is the exact line that you would need to change, and if you are running it locally, you would probably want to change it to this, which is mainly what I used while I was testing. So yeah, all of this can be run locally. If you boot Novusphere DB up locally, it will index the EOS form test contract, which was deployed by the block producer EOS Canada a few weeks ago, I believe. You do need to do a little bit of configuration with EOS DB to tell it to use the EOS plugin, but I can help people with that, or I can post a small guide on it if anything afterwards. But as you can see, the platform is starting to come together, even though it doesn't look the greatest right now, because I haven't really put too much time into its appearance. I've more so just been trying to get integration and functionality done. So what I'm planning on doing next, my next few steps on this really is starting to polish up the way this looks and the way it feels. So already one thing to point out is, so again, you can go ahead and try it out. It does require scatter. But when you make a post and you click post, it's even, and when you approve the scatter transaction, it's not apparently obvious to the user that something's actually happening. It takes a couple seconds, and this just has to do with how we currently have things set up. So it does, there's a small hang after you press post, and there's not really any visual indicator at this time to the user. But more importantly is that we can actually get rid of the hang time when posting just by making a few changes as to how this works. So that's something I plan on doing, is implementing a WebSocket API. So this is more like real-time data. Um, but so that's something I plan on doing, is getting rid of the hang and the clunkiness of how the platform currently works. But you can post new data, and if you go on any of like the threads, you can actually post in the threads themselves. So let me link an example of one that has some posts in it. So there's an example of one that has some posts in it. Um, so yeah, that's mainly my priority right now, is just cleaning this up so it feels a little better and it looks a little better. And the goal here really is to sort of recreate Reddit on EOS. And then once that's been done, really, that's one of the first big Novusphere dApps, or at least, the main concept of it. Um, and then it's very easy to go from there and reskin it so that you have something that looks more like a traditional streaming site that's focused mainly on videos, or a traditional, I guess there really isn't one for audio as there is with videos, but you can put together something like that fairly easily once all of this has come together. So my idea was to really start with something that's similar to Reddit, that's easy to use, easy to navigate, and overall I want it to function more or less like Reddit. But I'm open to any suggestions as to how the system should work.
Now, if somebody sent or posted something on there that was copyrighted, how do you think that would be taken down in the current state, even in the testing
Um,
phase right now, or what?
okay, so in regards to it being like taken down, once it's on the blockchain, it really can't be removed, because removing it would basically break the Merkle tree. Um, so what someone running a node can do, so as you can see here, if you refer to the GitHub line that I posted in the meetup chat, right now it is connecting to a Novusphere DB node that's hosted by us. So for example, if we received a copyright complaint, or if, something that we saw that was blatantly, against, uh, some questionable stuff, let's say, we would blacklist it ourselves, and we could prevent it from being served. Because the data itself is coming from our database, the Novusphere hosted database. But if a user wanted to circumvent any, and ensure as well that they weren't that no information was being censored, they are capable of setting up their own Novusphere DB instance, and instead configuring things to connect to that. So that's actually something I plan on doing with the UI change. Is I plan on actually having like a settings button where a user can also configure what the URL they're using for the connection to the Novusphere DB instances. So it's very easy to configure, and it doesn't require recompiling the interface and all that other stuff. So the user can easily change that on the fly. And I think that's really important to ensuring censorship prevention, because we can have multiple people or multiple parties running Novusphere DB nodes, and a user can always run it themselves if they want. So, in other words, just to like give a really brief response to what you asked, it's really up to the person running the Novusphere DB node to ensure that they're not serving any illegal content, because they are the ones that could be held responsible for it. And I suggest that if they ever receive any, legal complaints, that they comply with them. But as a personal individual user, if you want to get access to information that may have been blacklisted by other public Novusphere DB instances, you can just set up your own locally and use that.
Okay, cool. Thanks.
So, yeah, exactly. All of this can be ran locally. Um, So we did talk a bit about the incentives for running a node, and I believe this will tie into how staking will work, because right now all of this can be built into one application, like both the Novusphere. So for example, let's take a look at how EOS works, right? Um, a BP has to have a public endpoint, and that public endpoint basically gives users access to querying the blockchain on EOS. And a big part of the reason for that is because let's imagine a later point in time when EOS is bigger in size, and EOS is something like, let's say, using a terabyte of RAM. And I don't mean that there's a terabyte of RAM for sale. I mean like it's actually like running the process itself uses a terabyte of RAM. This is not going to be feasible for everyday people to run EOS on their own setups, or to even rent servers that are going to be able to run EOS. So in that case, you still need a way of getting data though off of the chain, and so that's the reason you have the public BP endpoints. So very similarly, what we can do is we can have a system where uh, built into the Novusphere node for staking Atmos is this sort of Novusphere DB setup that has the public endpoints. So the incentive for running a node would have to tie in with staking and participating in other aspects, like the bounty system, as you said, Road Crypto. Now, going back to what I was saying before, now that we have actually a little bit more of live data, I actually was chatting a bit with Code Blue just before this meetup, and I was telling him that now he's able to continue what he was working on before, because before what he was working on was everything was local based and was in his own local database, which is why he couldn't share it with everyone unless he was to host it himself. But now he can put that data on the chain and then build the interface around that data that's actually on the chain. So we're at the point now where people can publicly start building dApps using what we've already created so far that makes use of the Novusphere DB backend and the EOS blockchain for actually storing the data.
I just wanted to add a few things about the running your own node.
Sure.
So if you read the EOS white paper, it talks about sharding. Sharding is different from the sharding in Ethereum, for example. They're trying to break up the proofs of all the different tasks. Sorry, I accidentally let go of the control key. In Ethereum, they're trying to break up the tasks of consensus into many different clusters. Here, they're not trying to shard the consensus itself, but they're trying to give the ability of nodes to verify only the transactions they care about. So it's all, if you see, it used to be called threading. Now they just renamed it to sharding. Basically, all the information you can run your own node, basically only processing the information for the dApp you care about, and not for everybody else's dApp, and still be able to verify it via magic of Merkle roots and stuff. That it's somewhat consistent without having to run a completely light node.
Oh, okay. That would be great, actually, when they actually get to that point, because in that case, then we can easily bundle a piece of software together, or at least, some sort of like Docker image that's pre-configured with EOS, really just to monitor the Novusphere-related contracts and data.
Yeah, because it's not feasible for everybody to have like 16 gigs of RAM. It's just ridiculous. But for a single dApp, you don't need that much.
Yeah, exactly. Actually, that brings me into another question that's often been coming up in the chat, so I thought I'd cover it here, just for the people who don't read through all the messages that are going on in the chat. So one of the questions that has been coming up a lot is, how does the rising or how would the rising RAM costs affect building Novusphere on EOS? So there's two things that I really want to comment on in that regard. So first of all, it's a lot of people don't really understand how the whole RAM system works and where or what parts of a DAP actually need RAM. So, first and foremost, to clear up the misconception, so the content that goes into the database itself, so for example, the content you can already see on the EOS test site, none of that needs to be stored in RAM. That stuff is actually stored on disk as part of the block data. So when you write that data to EOS, it doesn't use any of your RAM and it doesn't use any of our RAM on EOS. What it will consume is it will consume your CPU, use your CPU resource, and your bandwidth resource on EOS, and those reset. So that's not a problem. Now, aspects of Novusphere that will involve using RAM are things like the bounty system or token balances. So this is, again, this ties into a misconception here. So right now there is a misconception that if you want to create a token on EOS or do an airdrop or something like that, that you have to pay this ridiculous amount of RAM for the users. And this is actually not the case. It depends on actually how you approach this. So the way RAM actually works on EOS is if you have a token, so let me give you an example of one of the tokens that were airdropped on EOS. I think its name was Horus Pay. The token might just be called Horus, but we'll use this as an example. So if I have Horus and you've never received this token before, and I decide to send it to you, you actually don't have a balance within the Horus table in EOS. So when I send you this this Horus, someone has to pay for the space that gets taken up now in RAM because balances are something that's going to be constantly changing. So when I send you this Horus, I am actually the one paying the RAM for your balance in this case. So the way a lot of the airdrops have been handled so far on EOS are the token creator will mint the token and then send it out to the people who should be receiving it. Now, if you follow the logic of what I said before, that means that these people don't have any balance of this token originally, so the airdropper, being the one sending it, is the one paying the RAM fee in this case. So what you can do to actually reduce the RAM costs as someone doing an airdrop or trying to distribute a token is you can instead have users claim that token from your contract instead of needing to um, instead of needing to pay for the RAM yourself. So what you can do is you can have a function in the contract where a user has to call that function, and that gives them a zero balance, and that allows you to shift the cost onto the user. And most users are going to have somewhere between 4 to 8 kilobytes of RAM, and a token balance isn't going to take up a huge amount of RAM. So like it's going to take up like, only a couple bytes. So there's a lot of ways that you can work to reduce the RAM footprint that you as like a project end up paying in regards to your upfront costs. Um, so I'm not really too worried about that. And so to give you another example, like if we look at how a bounty system could work, when the person creates a bounty, this is just a hypothetical, but the user could be paying the RAM to create the bounty because a bounty is going to be something that exists currently in the state. But then once the bounty is like all wrapped up and it's either been completed or it's expired or something like that, it can be removed from the RAM. So then that previously used RAM space goes back to the user. So it's not as if like we're constantly taking away RAM from the user every time they put a bounty. The space will go back to them. So there's a lot of ways that you can sustainably build gaps not to waste RAM and be very efficient about it. So I think that addresses one of the main concerns that I kept seeing come up in regards to the RAM fees that are currently going on EOS.
I think they'll all be hidden from the end user in the end anyway, like full automation.
Yeah, I agree. So one of the things that I don't really like too much about how the current interface works, and this is something I've already thought of. So the current interface being the EOS testing that I've worked on is it's fine that right now when a user posts that they need to approve a transaction in Scatter, excuse me, that doesn't necessarily seem like too much of a problem. Like, it's very similar to like, hey, are you really sure you want to post this? But where it could become a problem is how if an upvote downvote system is implemented, because I could see that being really annoying when you want to upvote someone, then you've got to approve a transaction or something like that. So I'm not exactly sure how that will be handled, because the only way that can easily be handled at this time is if the private key is known by the DApp instead of Scatter needing to approve it every single time. So I think I might, if we decide to build on EOS, I might look a little bit more into Scatter, and I might try discussing with them the potential option of they already have like a sort of identity system of who you've given your identity to in terms of websites, but if you could have a system where for a specific type of transaction you don't constantly need to approve it and it's just auto approved, that would help a lot in terms of building an upvote downvote system. But I think overall it's not really that big of a deal. Should be okay for now anyways, especially when we're just like in the testing phase of building things.
How long
I think
does the approval process even take? Is it usually pretty fast? I mean,
What do you mean the approval process?
so if it just sends like one approve, like an approve function before
Oh
they
yeah,
can
yeah.
upvote.
It's just like, yeah. It's okay. So it's block times in EOS are like 0.5 seconds, so they're super fast. And as for how the user feels, but it's not the block time that I'm talking about here. It's really how it feels for the user, right? Because it's like, okay, imagine every time you upvoted someone on Reddit, you got a message that popped up and it said, "Are you really sure you want to upvote this person?" You have to click OK. Like, that can get annoying really fast.
But basically, isn't it just returning it's returning a transaction that you just have to wait for it to complete and then you have to resubmit it? Is that kind of what you're saying, how it works right now?
It more so just like it pops up a dialogue that asks you to approve something, and you click a button that says approve, and you're good to go. But my point being is, like, if that dialogue is constantly popping up every time you want to upload someone, like that's really annoying. If you're doing it when you're just making a post, that's fine, because making a post is like, hey, are you really sure you want to post this? It's going to be on a blockchain. You can't delete it
Yeah.
after it's been posted. But I think doing it with every like upvote, that's really annoying. So there's a few ways to get around it, like I said, which is to actually have the DApp know your private key so we can just sign the message for you. But that's a security risk in of itself. So that's why I think an optimal way to go is to potentially reach out to Scatter and build something with them. The whitelist function. Maybe you can explain to me what that is, because I haven't extensively looked into Scatter. I just really took what I could use to start building this interface on EOS. So maybe you could explain to me what the whitelist function in Scatter is.
I was saying, I wonder if I could just automate it. It would be kind of annoying, though, to create like a scatter post bot or something like that, or um, like an automated approval bot just for scatter if they wouldn't just be able to provide that themselves.
I don't really think people would be too keen on the idea of needing to install an additional browser plugin, and then I don't know exactly how the permissions of browser plugins work. I think they're pretty sandboxed.
I prefer standalone software, to be honest.
What is this that you linked to?
It's just discussion about whitelisting of transactions. I don't like MetaMask and Scatter, to be honest, because of the DNS hijacking attack. As in, like, I'm not sure I had the right window selected, but I don't like the MetaMask and Scatter because of DNS hijacking attacks where, like, websites get, you go to the right URL, but it's a different website. And I think it's kind of a security risk long term to rely only on that. You can always compile a lot of this code as a standalone software using things like Electron or Ionic or other things that make websites into like standalone software for Windows.
Oh yeah, that's for certain, and that's why I think so that goes back to what I was saying about how if the application itself knew your private key, then it could just sign it for you. So I think having interfaces that can actually just be compiled to standalone applications and having Scatter just be one of many options, is really the way to go. And I think a lot of other sites have used that approach of either allowing a user to just input a private key or approve things through Scatter. So yeah, that could be one way to go. Is having if you don't want to constantly be approving Scatter, it's like, okay, well, here's a downloadable version of the application that you can just use instead of using it in your browser. Or if you really want to take the risk, you can just enter your private key into your browser.
Yeah, I agree.
So there's the point is though that there's multiple ways that this can be approached, and it's not a huge problem that can't be easily remedied.
Yeah, I think if you ever try the GrayMass wallet, for example, for EOS versus Scatter, which is also another wallet for EOS, the Scatter EOS wallet is a plugin from Chrome, and it's very hard. You have to find the website, make sure it's the correct one. You have to when you vote, you have to click a lot of buttons, confirm in this app, confirm in the website. When you have the standalone software like GrayMass Wallet, it's extremely obvious where to click. It has all the permissions inside of it. It's much more straightforward, and you don't have to worry about being on the right website and so on. I'm just trying to explain in general. It's much easier to use to have a standalone software.
I agree with you. I agree that some users are going to. I actually think with users, you're going to get a mix, right? You're going to get a mix of people who prefer the standalone software and people who just say, I don't want to download anything. I just want to use it in my browser.
Yeah, for just content consumption, you don't need to even input private key.
I think the worst case, yeah, exactly. That's true as well. I think the worst case scenario is even if users have to approve upvotes and downvotes via Scatter, the worst outcome of that is people are just going to vote less in terms of upvoting and downvoting. So I don't really think that's the end of the world either.
Which is fine.
Yeah, exactly.
If you have the feature within EOS, so you can use a cold wallet with like a secondary set of private keys that's sort of like your hot wallet, could you take advantage of that feature so that you could have an application that has access to that sort of like sort of temporary private key set, and then you have that like master key set that's sort of like the cold wallet being able to override those other private keys? Would that be the kind of way to go in terms of security?
Yeah, so in terms of setting up an account for EOS, and feel free to step on this if I miss anything on Unicron in describing this. I think an optimal way of using applications on EOS will be to have so you want to generate two private keys, which will give you two public keys. And one of those private keys you want to keep in cold storage, and one of them are going to be your hot wallet. And so one of them is the owner account, and that's your cold storage, and the other one is your active, and that is your hot wallet. And so you want to have funds either, you can delegate the funds to your hot wallet. You don't actually need to transfer them to your hot wallet from the owner, or you could just have them staked on the active wallet. And so the nice thing about this is, okay, let's say you entered that active there's no available balance on this active account, and you were to enter that private key into a web application, let's say as an example, and you're using the application, okay, great, and then boom, you get hit with a virus or something like that, and it steals your private key. Well, you're not completely screwed, because the way EOS works is staking takes 3 days to unstake, and you can monitor this process. I believe EOS Authority actually developed a tool where they will actually email you anytime there's activity on your account. So, anyways, if you notice your account is like, funds are being unstaked, and you're like, hey, I'm not the one who did that. Well, this is the time to go get your cold wallet, your cold wallet private key. You enter that in, and now, since that's the owner of the hot wallet, you can actually change the private key associated with the active account. And so, by doing that, you can remove access from the hacker who's stolen your private key. So, yeah, that's definitely one way we could look at how users could create accounts specific for using certain dApps. Feel free to add to that, Unicron, if there's anything.
That's actually accurate, exactly. And there's also other permissions possible. I'm actually not entirely sure about the EOS permission yet. I know in Steam they had a post permission specifically, a third key pair that only allows you to do zero amount transactions. But as you said before, I think in EOS they don't allow zero amount transactions anymore.
So you can have zero amount transactions as long as it's not the transfer function. So, for example, posting to the EOS form test contract, which is what the EOS test site uses, does not cost any EOS, but it's the actual transfer function itself in the EOS IO contract that has some validation to ensure that the balance is above a zero, and if it's not above a zero, then it throws an error. So you can't just use it for sending memos. I actually thought about opening an issue on this on the GitHub and pointing it out to them and saying like, hey, can you guys make it greater than or equal to zero so we can use this to send arbitrary messages? But I don't really know if they're going to care that much.
But if you look at like how so yeah, it's very possible, and I think you can make different permissions as well. It has a lot of customizability for that. But yeah, in a lot of times, if you use like DTube or whatever the Steam video thing is, I think they use the post key specifically to be able to just basically post information and not risk. You can have like cold storage perfectly holding your money, safely while interacting with the blockchain and not having any risk of your money being stolen because you're not actually using any of your keys that can move funds.
Oh, okay, I see that. Yeah, that's pretty cool. So I assume like when you're using the D2 platform, you just give them your post key.
I have to remember like which one is which because it's been a while for me. But yeah, there's a specific. If you go to your keys in Steam, for example, in the Steam Explorer, you'll see like a specific post key pair there that's specifically only for upvoting, downvoting, and I think maybe voting for witnesses, things like that that are not. That don't have anything to do with moving money.
Yeah, well, I mean, what you can do if you were to wanted an account to just use for dApps, like I said, is you can create account B, and then from A you can delegate resources to B, and you don't actually ever need to transfer the EOS to B. So it's not as if B can unstake those resources that you've given to B. So even if B's private key was ever compromised, the person getting access to B doesn't actually have permission to do anything other than consume your CPU and consume your bandwidth. And you could always change the private key of B if A was the owner. So I think that works actually very similarly to what you were just discussing. So yeah, it's definitely already possible on EOS to use a very similar setup to that. I don't know if it's possible to do it using just one account, because I haven't thoroughly looked into how the permissions of accounts on EOS work. But it's definitely possible using 2 accounts. I know that for certain. So I guess to cover what my plans are going forward right now, just to give everyone a brief idea, improve Novusphere DB so it has a WebSocket API, which means like you get live data. So as soon as data comes in, clients listening to that data immediately get the data. Whereas right now the way it works is sort of like you have to ask Novusphere DB every, let's say, half a second, hey, do you have new data? Hey, do you have new data? So that's going to be a big change in terms of really improving how things feel. And then I want to clean up this interface, get something that looks and feels more like the traditional form of Reddit. And then after that, I want to look to build something that's more similar to a streaming platform or sort of like website. So that's something. Those are things that like I'm looking to address over the next couple weeks. And then Unicron, I think, said you're going to look into working on some of the contract related stuff on EOS and see how that's going to like work out.
Yeah, I'm going to start looking into basically start building bounty systems, and we'll try to break them and see what's required and how easy they are to use.
Yeah, so you reminded me of something that I wanted to bring up. So another user pointed out the fact that they were like, they were asking, so what do we do if BPs decide to start banning accounts? Now, I don't think this is going to happen, but like, what do we do in this scenario? So what I mentioned is actually the way Novusphere DB works is it's built using a plugin system, and so right now there's a plugin that just listens to the EOS blockchain and takes that data and puts it into the database. So one way of approaching this is actually to build multiple plugins and have it listen to multiple blockchains. So any other blockchain that has like a zero fee system, I think would work really well. But it is possible to like build plugins for even blockchains that don't have zero fee. So that might be like one approach that we look at in the future if there is that form of censorship. But I really don't think there will be. So it's really just something that we'd have to see. Because I think it really boils back down to very similar in Bitcoin. Will miners commit suicide by starting to double spend like crazy just because they can? And I don't really think that's a feasible thing. I think even though miners clearly have the ability to double spend, I know at some point via BTC and Antpool had over 50% of the mining power. Just because they have the ability to double spend doesn't mean they're going to abuse it because they know it means the death of the platform and loss of money for them. So I think it's always better to, especially in the blockchain world, when dealing with things like BPs and stakers and miners and stuff like that, always make the assumption that people will act out of self-interest and what's going to make them the most amount of money. But yeah, I think that's pretty much it unless anyone has any questions they wanted to go over at this meeting. Just realized I was on the wrong chat.
I don't see any questions. I think that was very informative. Appreciate that. That answered a lot of questions that I had about EOS, some things that I didn't know, so I'm pretty happy about this
Yeah,
meeting.
okay. I think it would be fine to stop the recording here, and
Okay.
we'll call that a wrap. If anyone has any other questions regarding any of the stuff that we're currently working on, or where the project's currently headed, or any of that stuff, feel free to send me a message and we can talk about it.
Cool.
Or if you want to contribute, yes.
Definitely.
As you can see with the EO Test website, I'm not the greatest at designing things. I'm not a visual person. I'm very similar to Dan in the aspect of like, his approach of here's Cleos, here's a command line interface. Good luck, guys. we're not going to give you a UI-based wallet. So,
I'll be
yeah,
posting
building
some.
UIs is not my personal strong point.
Yeah, I'll be posting some of those GitHub links in this new replay that we'll have on YouTube for you. So
Yeah, I'll give you actually a few specific links, but yeah, thank you, I appreciate it.
cool.